right, so in this case reading video, we're going to look at the Suttor and Gundowda case. So in this case, there's a contingent conditions issue, but we're going to just focus on the treatment of the grounds on which specific performance can be refused, and specifically on grounds of unfairness, for example, where there's an element of unconscionability or sharp practice, as the judges state in this case here, and also the case's recognition of the fact that hardship amounting to injustice can also mean that an order for specific performance can be resisted. So in this case here, we had a sale of a station property. There was quite an elaborate sale agreement, so rather than it just being for a price of X, here there was a portion of the sale price in cash, the fact that Suttor could reside in the homestead for life, so there was a life interest in the property, and be supplied with milk, meat and horses, and also that he'd get an annuity. So essentially it was cashing out a pension, I guess, and a living in addition to a cash price payment. And as well, interestingly, there was a part of the contract which said that the purchaser had to retain the services of 3 of Suttor's relatives, okay? And that they more specifically had to enter into a deed with the 3 relatives. And we'll have a look at the relevance of that, which was in clause 8 of the contract between the parties. We'll have a look at the relevance of that in the course of looking at the case reading guide. Now, in terms of the contract itself, a clause of the contract provided that if government consent to the sale was not obtained within a period of time, the contract should be deemed to be terminated. Here, the seller, the vendor, argued that this was an automatic right of termination, but the buyer argued that no, this meant just that you could elect to terminate. And here, the buyer sued for specific performance, arguing that the contractual right to terminate, that it was a right to terminate rather than an automatic right. And here they more specifically argued that that right to terminate had been lost by the seller, by the vendor, by Suttor, because of the way they continue to act as if the contract was on foot once the right to terminate had arisen. Okay, great. Now, so here the purchaser wanted the property, so they sought specific performance. Now, on appeal, a question was raised as to whether specific performance could be granted in circumstances where there was some unfair conduct on behalf of the person seeking the order. So here, the plaintiff here, Gundowda. However, the question of what Gundowda had done or not done was raised too late. So it was raised on appeal, it wasn't raised at trial. So here, the order for specific performance wasn't set aside, despite the fact that there were some indications that Gundowda had, withheld some information from the seller. Yes, there was some sharp practice on their behalf, specifically around the taxation implications of the sale. But they didn't have a legal obligation to inform the seller of that advice from the accountant, which they seem to have both shared. But in any case, it was some sharp practice, a little bit dodgy. So the specific performance was not denied on that ground, but the discussion of the judges is relevant to us because it shows that when those grounds of unfairness exist, the court in its discretion might deny the order for specific performance that's sought. And in the context of that discussion, the court also states that the only option available to Suttor here would have been to show that there was hardship amounting to an injustice. And then that wasn't established on the facts, okay? The case, so I just had this slide here just to show you some of the quotes from the case that I thought were particularly relevant, not irrelevant, that were particularly relevant on specific performance. So I've just got that there just to, I guess, help supplement your notes. So if you missed them, these are things that you should note. Now, in terms of the case reading guide questions, So the first question is around clause 8, which is the clause that states that the purchaser had to enter into the deed with the 3 relatives. Now, the reason why this is relevant is generally contracts for personal services or that involve personal services won't be specifically performed. And generally it's because the court doesn't want to be, seem to be making people slaves, so forcing them to do things. When really, you breach the contract, you get that right or entitlement to damages. So here, Suttor actually raised the fact that it involved personal services because of that deed requirement to do with the 3 relatives continuing to work on the farm, and said that no, the specific performance can't be granted here because there is an element of personal services. Okay, so the first question here kind of pertains to that. And it says, why wasn't clause 8 an impediment to ordering specific performance? Here, it wasn't an impediment to ordering specific performance because the required performance was entering into the deed itself and not the specific performance of the deed. So it didn't say that it didn't mean that the court was requiring the relatives to do the work. Okay, it was just the entry into the deed itself. And the obligation to enter into a deed did not require constant supervision of the court. Therefore, the court said that was fine, no problems. So just to reiterate, clause 8 only requires that the purchaser shall enter into the deed provided for. And then, it just meant that the people party to the deed, the relatives, they could then enforce it. That was what the deed was for. Okay. So it didn't require constant supervision of the court, therefore court's fine with that aspect of the contract, and clause 8 wasn't seen to be an impediment to ordering specific performance, because the only thing that had to be performed was that the deed was entered into. The end. The next question, so specific performance is an equitable remedy and discretionary. So remember, it's not given as a right. In this case, the defendant raised in the appeal a ground which the court might have exercised the discretion to refuse to make the order. What was this ground and why did it fail in this case? Okay, so this is the unfairness ground I mentioned earlier. So you can see the answer to this question at 437 and 438. And I'll just quote from the judgment. So the appellant contends that the plaintiff was at least guilty of sharp practice by its agent McManamy when he failed to reveal Walter's opinion to the defendant, Walter being the accountant, so his opinion regarding the taxation implications of the sale. Specific performance would be inequitable and the plaintiff should be left to its remedy, if any, at law. Lack of candour and suppression of the truth, where this results in hardship to the defendant, has been held to be a sufficient ground for refusing specific performance. However, the difficulty here is that the defence is raised for the first time on appeal, so it just simply came too late. And the present, this is the judgment finishes, so the present is not a case in which we have before us all the facts bearing on the defence. So because this wasn't argued at trial, all the facts weren't there, court unwilling to consider it at this late stage, okay? So the evidence wasn't led at trial, therefore no good, too late, too bad, too sad, okay? All right, so here I just want you to keep in mind with this case that it does show that unfairness can lead to the refusal to order specific performance, but on the facts of this case here, it wasn't pleaded early enough, therefore the order for specific performance stood. Okay, all right, that's all I want you to do for this case, so I will stop there. Thanks, guys.